There's been a lot of handhelds coming out this year, and we're only halfway through it so far. So many of them come out and it piqued my interest enough to make me want to watch a bunch of reviews on them, but not really enough to make me want to look at it myself for review, until this came along. This is the RG Cube, made by our good old friends over at Anbernic. Thank gosh it has a name that's not a pain in the ass to say for a video. I mean, have you seen all the H700 devices that have come out this year? This is not even all of them, by the way. Just let that sink in. How the hell do reviewers keep up with this shit? But despite all the ridiculous releases of the same damn device, they've come out with something pretty special here. I've been wanting to look at a handheld with a 1x1 screen for a while now, but at the time, the only ones that were available, as far as I know, were the ones made by Powkitty, and their quality is questionable to say the least. But then Anbernic came along and announced this, and I was immediately interested as soon as I saw how it looked. Then I heard it was Android and that it was powerful, and that was enough to convince me to look at this. And it instantly became the new favorite day one. I had a lot of fun testing out games on this, as well as just playing this for fun. I originally wanted to make a bunch of more multiverses videos, but because of this thing, I just haven't been able to. I'm sorry. You know, actually, I don't know why I'm apologizing, because, like, nobody watched those videos anyway, so what am I whining about? But enough of my rambling, let's go ahead and get into why this one is the one to get. Now, before I actually go into why I love this thing so much, I do want to point out some flaws about it that do bother me, not that much, but enough to the point where I feel like they need to be addressed, and where I feel like someone else could change their mind about buying this thing as soon as they hear about them. So, just bear with me here. Let me go off for a bit. First off, the thumbsticks. They're not as good as the ones on my Retroid Pocket 2S. Why is this an issue? Because the Pocket is $100, while the Cube is $170. Anbernic, you gotta get some better sticks, please. They do still feel fine. I got used to them pretty quickly. It's just they're switched out thumbsticks, and they don't have full rotation. It's more like an 8-way D-pad. This doesn't bother me that much. I got used to them very quickly, again. But for $170, I expect just a little better than this, Anbernic. Next is the screen. Now, I know I just got through talking about how I've been wanting to look at a handheld with a 1x1 screen, but there is a problem with it. Now, my unit doesn't have this problem in particular, but that doesn't mean yours might not. There's been an issue with a lot of screen bleed, or well, is it referred to screen bleed or light bleed? I don't know. Some people say light bleed, some people say screen bleed, I don't know. But it is an issue. It happened mostly with the review units as soon as they were coming out, and even some retail units as they were coming out. Again, mine didn't come with any screen bleed, thankfully, but that doesn't mean yours might. So, you may get it, you may not get it if you ordered the first batch, mainly if you pre-ordered this thing as soon as it launched. Now, I have heard that you can contact Anbernic and have this issue resolved. I don't know how that works, though. I've never done anything like that before, so take that with a grain of salt. Finally is the setup process, and this is going to be mainly a problem for emulation novices, I feel. You'll see this button right here. Now, what does it do? It brings up a built-in launcher for the RG Cube. It's basically just to make it easier to navigate your ROMs instead of going into individual emulators and opening them up in there. Now, what's the problem with it? It will only scan ROMs on an SD card and not on the device's own storage. There's an option to both buy the RG Cube with either an SD card or without one, but if you buy one without an SD card, you'll basically won't be able to use that built-in launcher. Now, other people recommend not using this launcher anyway, but this can still make it difficult for emulation novices to have a very plug-and-play experience. Now, as far as people who have experience setting up devices, like I do, this was more of just a mild annoyance to me than anything. I knew what I was doing the whole time I was setting this up, really. Although, weirdly enough, even on the external storage, there was no ROMs folder or a BIOS folder. I had to make my own, for some reason. Like I said before, I knew what I was doing when I was setting this up. It was no big deal for me, but I can see this being a problem for anyone who doesn't know anything about emulation and is wanting to buy this. You're going to need a guide on how to use emulators on Android. So I'm going to link in the description below Retro Game Corp's YouTube channel as well as his website, so you can try to figure out what to do. Now, Anbernic, if you're listening somehow, you seriously need to fix that issue with the RG Cube. That built-in front end, I mean specifically. It should be able to scan both the SD card and the external storage. There should be an option for both, not just an SD card. If you're trying to make it a very seamless experience for your customers, you need to fix that issue. Because to be clear, yet again, if I haven't said it before, I love the Cube. I think this is probably your best product yet so far. But that setup process is not going to be great for everyone depending on which version of the Cube they buy. Now that we have all my problems with it out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the hardware. Of course, let's start with what we have on the outside. Of course, we have our two thumbsticks, our face buttons that feel nice, a Sega-style D-pad that I actually really like. It feels pretty good. We have our start and select on the bottom right. I thought it was going to feel weird at first, but I got used to it pretty quickly. And on the bottom left, we have our back and home button, and the button for the Anbernic launcher that we do not care about. On the bottom is where the sound from the speakers come out, which, by the way, this thing gets loud even at half volume. Speaking of which, on the left we have our volume up and down buttons, as well as our power button. Don't worry, these buttons are recessed enough to where there should be no accidental button presses. I haven't experienced a single time where I accidentally pressed any of them while playing a game. On the top we have our LM buttons, clicky as usual. L2 and R2 that are analog. These buttons will feel a bit stiff at first, but after a little while, they'll start to break in and feel much better. We also have our headphone jack, SD card slot, and our charging port. You can also see we have a vent here. That's because this thing has a fan in it. And that's how you know it's powerful. When it's got a fan. Fans! On the back there's another vent for the fan as well as these ergonomic grips. Overall, the device feels really good in the hands. I'm super impressed by how good it feels, and the shoulder buttons even have this nice texture to them that make them feel more grippier, if that makes sense. In conclusion, this is the nicest handheld I've looked at so far, and if that's important to you, I'm happy to say this is not going to disappoint. Now, I am also more than happy to say that the games run amazing. Everything I played on here ran awesome. Almost nothing on here required me to tinker around with to get running good on the Cube. Now, of course, all your 2D stuff is going to work just fine here. Everything from the NES, SNES, Game Boy Advance, Genesis, Master System, Game Gear, and more. It's mainly the big boy systems that take a lot to run on here, as well as the games that benefit from this 1x1 screen that I mainly want to talk about. Now remember when I mentioned before the Cube came out, we only had the devices made by Powkitty? Those devices were the RGB30 and the RGB20SX. And some systems that were really popular to play on these 1x1 screens that was a huge selling factor was systems like Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Neo Geo Pocket Color. And honestly, I see what all the hype is about now when playing these games on the RG Cube. These games look great on the screen. There's hardly any black bars at all, they practically fill the entire screen, and because the screen is also 720 by 720, you know those pixels are going to be looking extra crispy. I especially love playing Neo Geo Pocket Color. Playing something like SNK vs Capcom was especially fun, as I can also report the D-pad works great for classic arcade fighting games. There are moments where there are misinputs, but that could also just be from me as I'm not that great at fighting games to begin with. Then we have our big boy systems. I want to go ahead and start with N64 and Dreamcast. It's pretty much the same as how it was on my 2S. Emulation is smooth, certain games that are normally hard to run on most emulators play just great, and you can even fast forward through unskippable cutscenes. Plus, the black bars on the top and bottom really don't bother me. It still feels and looks good to play on here. Even better again with the screen being 720p, unlike the 2S, which was 640 by 480p. Now, I'm not trying to diss the 2S, by the way. It's just the only other console I have to compare, as it's also pretty powerful itself, and it also runs by Android. Next was the one system this handheld still couldn't help me with. Not that I expected it to, but once again, my hacked Vita is still my PSP machine. Again, I didn't expect PSP to look great on here. It ran very well, of course, but 16:9 games just do not look good at all to me on this handheld. The black bars are just way too big, and the game is just way too small on here. I hated it on here even more than I would have hated playing PSP on other devices with just a 4:3 screen. But if you want to play PSP on here, I'm at least happy to tell you that they will play on here. Just remember, they're going to be real small on a screen like this. Now we're getting into some pretty intense systems, like GameCube and PlayStation 2. And man, I'm impressed with how both those systems run on here. They basically require no tinkering at all for them to run so damn good on here. But before you do, I do recommend that you turn the high mode on the RG Cube before playing GameCube and PS2. When you swipe down from the top of the screen, you'll see a setting for CPU. When you're playing GameCube or PS2, make sure to turn that on high so you can guarantee that the games will run fine. That setting also resets every time you turn the device completely off. So if you turn it on, play a game, and it's not running very well, make sure you have that setting turned on to high. It's also where you can find the setting for the RGB lights on here. Yeah, the reason I'm mentioning this now is because honestly guys, I really do not care about these. I just leave them turned off all the time. But they're here if you like them. Now, back onto the actual games. GameCube, of course, again, runs awesome on here. The only setting I had to mess with was the aspect ratio. Out of the box, it had the game stretched out to fill the whole screen. That's fine, it was an easy fix, and now it looks just fine. I didn't have to do anything else after that. Almost everything I threw at it just worked. I say almost because we do still have a couple stinkers. Mario Kart Double Dash, while running just fine, had this blue screen issue that was on my 2S when I mentioned it there as well. But I know why now. Someone commented on that video and explained that it's just an issue with Dolphin on Android for Double Dash when you use the Vulkan backend. You'll need to switch to the OpenGL backend. It's very easy to do, and you can even set Double Dash to specifically always open with the OpenGL backend and everything else to still open with Vulkan. Spider-Man 2 for GameCube wouldn't even start for some reason, and Ultimate Spider-Man runs alright, but every once in a while just slows down for a few seconds. And for some reason, The Incredibles, of all things, tends to chug a lot on here. Of all the things, why does the movie tie-in game run bad on here? Whatever, those three games were basically the only ones that ran bad on here. Everything else ran amazing still. It's obviously not going to play every GameCube game, but it will play a lot though still. The same can be said for PlayStation 2, although I didn't really find a single game that ran awful on here. Everything ran awesome. Even God of War 2 ran amazing with basically no frame drops or slowdown. The only thing I had to tinker with in PlayStation 2 was the on-screen controls, which should have definitely been off by default, but it's fine, they're really easy to turn off. I remember PS2 on my 2S not running very well at all. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't great. I remember with God of War 2 that I had to tinker with a lot of settings. I had to scale the resolution down under a one-time scale, as well as max underclocking. It was to where the game was playable, but not ideal if you ask me, and I basically had to do that with most games that ran on the 2S. Here with the Cube, I didn't have to do anything at all. The only game that gave me even a little bit of trouble was Spider-Man 2 for PlayStation 2. It wasn't even that it ran bad, it just had its hiccups every now and then. Now comes two of what were my favorite systems to play on this 1x1 screen. DS and 3DS. I was incredibly excited to play these on the RG Cube. Every other device I've played DS games on was either a 4:3 screen where I had to keep switching between the two DS screens, or a 16:9 screen where I had the two screens side by side. And I didn't like either of those, but on the RG Cube with its 1x1 screen, I can just stack the two DS screens on top of each other, and it's a touchscreen. Almost no DS game is restricted from being played on here. And I had the best time playing it on the RG Cube. I felt like a kid again playing Sonic Rush on here. I will admit though, the touchscreen is not perfect here. In something like Ben 10 where I just need to swipe on the bottom screen every once in a while is fine. In something like Sonic Rush, specifically the special stages where I need to use the touchscreen a lot, it was a little jank. But I still very much enjoyed my time on here with DS games, don't get me wrong. But I'm not going to say it's any better than just playing these games on an actual DS or 3DS. Speaking of 3DS, those also run pretty good on here. Now, I've never done 3DS emulation before this, so bear with me. I just decided to go with the default emulator it came with on the RG Cube, which was Citra. I had a bit of trouble figuring out how to get Citra to recognize my ROMs, but I did eventually figure it out. I would also recommend using that high CPU mode for 3DS, just in case something doesn't run well. The first few times I tried out 3DS, the games ran fine, but had a bunch of hiccups, and then eventually they started running better. I think that's because of shaders compiling and stuff, but I don't really know though. To put it simply, they ran just alright at first, but got better in time. The only game that still gave me occasional hiccups was Kirby Planet Robobot. Everything else pretty much ran just fine with just like a frame stutter every once in a while. It kind of felt like playing on an actual 2DS, just a bit smaller, which felt nostalgic for me, as the 2DS was my first 3DS console that I played as a kid back in the day. Now, obviously, like GameCube and PS2, not every 3DS game can be played on here. I don't really know what 3DS games are super demanding on emulators though. All I do know is that everything I threw at it ran fine. I had a pretty great time with 3DS on here. I had a great feeling about the Cube before I even got my hands on it, and I think I was pretty much in the right to. This thing is amazing, and is probably the best emulation handheld that I've looked at so far. Even despite that weird setup process, I can happily say that this is my new favorite emulator. To use at home, to clarify. To use at home. My favorite one to use on the go right now is still definitely the Mio Mini Plus, just to clarify. It is still a pretty niche handheld though, when it comes to wanting to play stuff like DS and Game Boy. As much as I love this thing, I can tell it's probably not for anyone. Some people are probably going to want to get the RG556 instead for that 16:9 screen, instead of what we have on here. But, in my opinion, DS games are not going to look very great on that screen, because it's going to be either stacked vertically with these big-ass black borders on the sides, or it's going to be stacked horizontally. And I don't like that either. I don't think it looks good. PSP will, though. But tell me, guys, what do you think about the RG Cube? Do you like it? Are you planning on buying it? Are you enjoying it so far and already have it? Let me know down below in the comment section, as well if you like this video and how I can improve on this type of content in the future. And as always, I will see you guys next time. For now, though, I'm going to play some more Kirby Planet Robobot. In case you don't know, you control Kirby, but you control him in this big-ass mech suit where you're just beating the shit out of enemies. It's pretty sick. I'll see you guys later.